I'm going to very briefly talk through what a standardised test is and the benefits of that for interventions and how the two relate to each other. So, a standardised assessment is any form of test that requires all test takers to answer the same questions in the same way and is then scored in a standard or consistent manner. So, what that means is that it's then possible to compare the relative performance of individual students or groups of students. Schools use standardised tests because they have many benefits, even outside of more formal exams, in that they will often provide gap analysis, which obviously enables effective interventions, and they can be used to baseline and screen new cohorts of individual students, and ensure that students are on track in all areas of their learning. So, in order to produce reliable results, standardised tests need to be administered and marked according to the test guidance. But once that's kind of adhered to, then you can be quite sure that the results that you get from those tests are reliable and can therefore be used to plan effective interventions. So they enable progress to be sort of tracked in an independent way, and they enable individual schools to see their progress and compare it to a representative sample of students. So to see the results in context, really. The assessments are developed in a really rigorous way to make sure they're valid and reliable. That's a process that takes at least 18 months, actually, and it involves initially, obviously, developing a really robust test framework that defines the content and skills that need to be assessed. And then once the questions have been written and reviewed, it's tested with a representative sample of students, it's a large number. So, the absolute minimum you'd be looking at is 1,000 per year group, but it will usually be a lot more than that. And the trials do tend to take place at a time when the tests are designed to be used. So they can provide really useful outcomes for schools. Some of the actual results that you will get are things like, so you get a raw score, and you can get that from any test. That's just your kind of 10 out of 20, very basic sort of score. You'll get the standardised score. So they are standardised to an average score of 100. So you look at those and know that 100 is the average, and it's then easy to see whether a student is above or below the mean, and that's relative to, as I've said, the representative sample that you have. Alongside that standardised score, you can also get an age standardised score. So that is similar to the standardised score, but it takes age into account. So, for example, with your summer-born students, you're going to be able to account for the fact, and this probably applies more in younger years, but it does apply at that older age range too, to an extent. You can account for the fact that some of your students are 10 months younger than others, and that will be taken into account into their score. So that's lots of teachers like that, depending on the purpose of the test, as a kind of fairer way of understanding progress. In our tests at Harder Education, we also often provide percentiles, and so the way that they work is a percentile of 50 is the average, and then a score that's, say, in the 68th percentile means that 68% of the group scored below that student's standardised score. So you therefore know that that child is in the top third for his or her cohort. The other measure we often provide that's really helpful, or schools tell us that it's helpful, is a reading age or a mathematics age. So that's sort of a quick measure of attainment against the age at which a student's performance is typical. So lots of schools tell us that that's really useful for communicating with parents actually, that they can say your child's reading age is X, and that's sort of instantly understandable in a way that perhaps something like a standardized score, it might not be quite so obvious to start with. So those measures alongside gap analysis give a really clear starting point for schools to assess where their students are and then to start to plan for interventions. So taking, for example, and this is just an example, a class of 11-year-olds, what you can do is issue them with the same test at, say, the start of their school journey, and then use those scores to understand what their starting point is and use the gap analysis to work out what the areas are that are in need of intervention. So that is done usually using strand analysis. So within, say, maths, for example, although we also offer it for reading for this age range of sort of 11 to 14 or even up to 16, you can actually kind of filter down by strand to see which area it is that's most in need of intervention. Marie and Naomi are lined up now to talk through those interventions, so I'm going to hand over to them to go through that in detail. But in general, I hope that is an overview of the interventions that they're going to talk about, where they come from. So the tests that they align with are our Access Maths and Access Reading tests. And those tests kind of fit this 11 to 14 age range perfectly, and will give that gap analysis that enables these interventions to be used effectively.